My subject is the high calling of fatherhood. And what I'd like to do is just quickly, where's the clock, Andy? Yeah, I got to see that. Being a Baptist, I got to watch that. I want to break it down to the priority of the high calling of fatherhood, just a bit of my testimony, and then I want to conclude with just some suggestions in developing the high calling of fatherhood, more so from the father to child perspective. The glory of fatherhood, the Proverbs tells us this: grandchildren are the crown of old men, and the glory of sons is their fathers. So it is a blessing, and I've experienced this with 11 grandchildren. So it's been mutual. I certainly delight in my grandchildren. And in fact, yesterday I was working with my son on his house, and my two little grandchildren there, the girl and the boy, they're watching us. And I say, stay back, honey, stay back. You know, I didn't want them to get hurt. So that certainly was a blessing to me, and I enjoyed that. And by the same token, it's reciprocating, and that's why the rest of that verse says, and the glory of sons is in their father. I have 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls, and it's an honor to have all children who are aggressively seeking the Lord. And I say that humbly by God's grace, because left to me to do that, it wouldn't have happened. But I have a very good wife, and we've worked together on that, and we're just so thankful that they are seeking the Lord. And it's my hope, at least, that they honor us, which they do, and they glory in us as their parents. And even as we're approaching, me in particular, late middle age. I'm almost 70. My wife is considerably younger than me. She's 9 years younger than me, and that has actually proved to be a blessing for me when I entered into marriage, to have a wife who had come through a godly Christian home, and as Ethan mentioned, was a very good helpmeet to complement me in many of my immaturities. So that was a blessing. But now I want to just stress this vehemently. This is the underlying premise, and I have to be careful on this because I could really run the clock on this. Again, being a Baptist, I have to be careful. That the family is the basic building block of society. It's not the state, and it's not, it takes a village. So scrap that. It's, in my opinion, the best relational arrangement for social harmony there is. And what I find very interesting, I'm preaching to the choir, telling you in the church this, but I see some, let's just say, non-ecclesiastical movements, worldwide conservatism. They're asking the same question. They're looking at societies and saying, wait a second, our fertility rate, our replacement rate isn't high enough. And they see the danger of that. How much more than we as believers, that should be ingrained in us, that this family, again, to reiterate what I've just said, not just for social harmony, but economically. And I'm a big fan of Thomas Sowell. Anybody know who Thomas Sowell is? Yes, good for you. You should be reading his books, listening to his podcasts, whatever. And as far as I know, he's not a believer, but he is the mind for the 20th century, 21st century, and he's done a lot of work on economics, social political issues. But one of the statistics that I find is very helpful, particularly substantiating my claim as the intact family being the best unit economically, was before the Civil Rights Movement in 1965, the minority families, their per capita income, man and woman together, children, was rising. But once the Civil Rights Movement, it had some good to it, there's no question about it, but as far as I understand it, got involved in that, and the let's just say the cataclysmic acceleration of single-parent homes destroyed that entity economically. Now, that's not just in minority communities now, it's now happening in non-minority communities. So that per se is a big factor in building a strong economy, is an intact family. And I saw this, and I had worked in prison ministries over the years, that many of the men, unfortunately, who were in prison had come from single-parent homes. And to their testimony, it was a detriment. So here again, that is absolutely essential when we talk about the high calling of fatherhood, that not just ecclesiastically, but economically, socially, it works. There's no question about it. So with that in mind, just a brief allusion to my own testimony. I was raised in a Roman Catholic home. My mother was not per se Catholic; she was Protestant more. But that was the mix there. And my father was not a believer. Hopefully, at the end of his life, he did. I'm hoping that. Whatever. But what's interesting, and I'll use this term essentially, is the modeling that comes out from particularly the father. So there was negative and there was positive. My father was a heavy drinker, and that was not a good thing. The family paid a price for it. Our family business paid a price for it, as well as some other, let's just say, character defaults. And I even remember, as a young kid, taking his whiskey glasses and filling them with Pepsi and chucking them, to model him. That's what I saw. It's neither here nor there, but to this day I'm a teetotaler because of being raised in that background. And well, that's another discussion. But there was positives modeled by my father. So, and one of the prescribed questions in the syllabus was, what if you didn't grow up in a Christian home, godly home? And I didn't. But there was still some positives modeled from my father. My father was a very hard worker. He had a produce business, fruit and produce, trucked fruit and produce, and as an entrepreneur. And I grew up in that atmosphere. I just loved it. And in that context, being a hard worker was a badge of honor. That's how we evaluated each other. Oh, that guy can work. Or no, this guy here, he's a bit of a sluggard. So even at an early age, I was inundated in that culture. And the interesting thing about that whole movement, there was a wide mix of all kind of ethnicities involved in the produce business. So I never was, for the most part, tempted into any kind of racism in that context, because I worked with all let's just say, all flavors of people. But the badge, again, was that, and this was the positive influence from that, was just good, hard work. So again, and I carried that through to this day, and I've passed it on to my children. I was converted at the age of 21, and even though my father was alive at that time, my relationship improved with him, but it was the men in the church that I grew up in as a believer once I was converted that really had an influence on me. And this is the late 70s, and I'm somewhat of an amateur historian now, and I love to read history, but I could just kick myself because these men had a great influence on me. But as I think back about these men, many of them were World War II veterans. And some of these guys had fought and landed in Normandy and fought. Other guys were in the Navy. Other guys have fought in the South Pacific. And again, I think back now, I said, oh my, I wish I would have been where I am now, historically thinking and minded back then. But nonetheless, they were a great influence on me. And that's why, and I think allusion has been made to this, that how critical older, mature men have influence on younger men. And that's why this is a good situation here. So I got married at 31, and to answer another question on the syllabus, I started a family right away. I give that credit to the Roman Catholic tradition. And I was no longer obviously a Roman Catholic. I was going to a Bible-believing church. But in the Roman Catholic tradition, when I grew up, it was big families, real big families. And that was a good thing. And that kind of carried over. And some of my other friends who were now born-again believers had come from the Catholic tradition as well. And we all were thinking the same thing. Big families, and right away we started this. So that was a blessing, because having grown up in the 50s and the 60s and then the early 70s, it was individuality in a good way, community, but individuality. So this prolific welfare dependence, it wasn't there in my circle of upbringing. Amidst all, and again back to my father, he had some moral issues, but there was a go-getting entrepreneurism. He worked 7 days a week. Now that's not a good thing necessarily, but that's the kind of influence that I was surrounded. And back to the produce business as well. I did work in the produce business, and I was actually the minority there. Okay, it was in the city, which was a good thing, and I got along with these chaps very well. But there was some good models there, guys that really, hey, I just work hard to try the best you could to support your family. And I remember later on in my work experience, I think it was probably in my middle 30s, I was already married, and at that point I was just driving a concrete truck. And there's certain slogans that resonate in your mind, and I challenge you to be this way, especially young guys. There was one guy there, he was just a hardcore guy, rough construction worker, and just rough. And I liked him a lot. But he was telling me he was working on a highway crew, and he said he got laid off, and he told the boss, he said, look, you got to get me work. And that was his mindset. He said, you got to get me work. He said, I got young'uns to feed. And everybody know what young'uns are? They're young'uns back there. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I never forgot that. And I had probably 1 or 2 kids at that time, but I thought, that's it. I'll never forget that. And boy, he was just one of them guys, one cigarette after another, but a hard worker. Hard worker. I got young'uns to feed. So when I got married, I drove a garbage truck, did concrete work, concrete truck. And in the meantime, I was actually very involved in the local church. Before I'd gotten married, I had gone to Word of Life Bible Institute, and then I'd then gone to Lancaster Bible College. And when I did get married, we went to Africa eventually, my wife and I, as missionaries, and we were, again, very, very involved in our local church, and that formed us as well as formed our children. So I'm going to answer this question now. How did fatherhood change me? And I guess again, the foundation of answering this question is, what are we supposed to be doing, whether we're fathers or whatever, and who owns us? Who owns our efforts? And Paul says it real well, Romans 14, 7 and 8, for no one lives for himself, no one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. So, as a father, and all my children are grown now, my youngest is 22, and we have pretty much an empty nest now as of last week. We have this accountability to God, and it manifests itself in many, many, many different directions. But these are some of the lessons I learned and how it changed me, and this is, again, in answer to one of the proposed questions in the syllabus. We are training these young'uns for adulthood, okay? That's absolutely essential. We're not training them to be kids the rest of their life. So we are focusing on teaching them to prepare for adulthood. And there's a couple different ways, and I'll suggest some. And one of them is ingratiating in, is that a word? Ingraining in them, that's the word I want, the mindset to serve. And Titus says this well, and let our people also learn to engage in good deeds, excuse me, to meet pressing needs that they may not be unfruitful. So we are teaching our young people to serve in each other, in the family, in the church, and in the society that we live in. So, particularly on the latter note, so that when they enter a job, they're going to be the best they can be at that job. They're not going to be whining little saps that, oh, I don't get paid enough, so I'm not going to do this. This is above my pay grade. No, that's not the way we train them. We train them as you do the job. And again, I make allusion back to my foundation, growing up in the produce business with all sorts of varieties of people, and mostly lower class people, because that was the nature of the labor force. But it was, no, we're going to do the job, and we're going to get it done. So we're training our young people to serve. And then also, as a father, and I'm still growing in this, I have to admit this, there's the discipline of self-examination, constantly evaluating myself, confessing my sins, and what Andy said too, not being afraid to apologize to the children and your wife publicly when I've failed, when I've sinned. But also balance, my oh my, how critical just the balance of life is. And that's difficult because, again, as Christian people, we're passionate, we're idealists, we're visionaries. But to maintain the balance is very critical. And another lesson I learned to pass on is we're not living for toys, okay? Let me say that again. You men in particular, join me in this. It's not about toys. It's not about us just making money for toys. Yes, there's things we can enjoy in life. We have hobbies, but we really need to pass this on to our young people, that it's not the most important thing to have the biggest house or the newest truck or the biggest boat or the newest rifles. No. It's not about toys. It's about, again, modeling service. One of the first things I did with my children, as soon as they started making money, I said, you need to get an orphan from Food for the Hungry or Compassion International or something. And I think most of them still do that. I could be wrong on that, but most of them do that right away they said, okay, X amount of dollars a month is going to some organization that serves unfortunate, real poor. Can I emphasize that? Real poor, R-E-A-L, poor. We won't go there. But let me just leave it at that and say that they always embrace that, and that was really a blessing. I think it's been a blessing for them because we're all probably lower middle class. Myself and my kids, none of us are extravagantly wealthy, but all our needs are pretty much taken care of. And I believe that God honors those who honor the poor, and that's a lesson we passed on. Another lesson we passed on was just respect for authority, the church, the family, civil authorities, and that doesn't mean in the times that we live in we don't confront particularly cultural and civil authorities in the right manners. I'm not excluding that, but I often chuckle at parents who are correcting their kids for being rebellious. And I may know that person, and I said, well, I'm going to save my breath for cooling my soup, because you yourself don't have a healthy respect for authority, and you're trying to teach your kid that? I said, just drop back and punt and examine yourself and says, okay, yes, as a parent, as an adult, as a member of the church, as a member of society, in other paradigms that we're in, I want to make sure that I'm practicing that and carrying that on. I've seen that really backfire with people in the ministry who had very successful ministries, but their children didn't do well, because I could say there's a direct equation here, that the individual did not have the respect for authority the way they should have. And again, that doesn't preclude what we're attempting to do in revolutionizing our culture. I'm not saying that. And then finally, I'm big on this, is promoting intellectual cultivation. I like the term blue-collar intellectuals, and that's what I consider myself. I probably have 1,200, 1,500 books in my library, and I got a bad hip, but that bad hip is from working in concrete construction. So I'm not saying it's bad to be white-collar. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying a blue-collar intellectual is a well-read person. I highly encourage to be passing that lesson on, to have your children read biographies of heroes. I'm, like I said, somewhat of a historian, so I do read history and that sort of thing, and really put before them credible, let's just say models, real heroes, okay? Let me use that word again. I mean real heroes, not from necessarily the sports world or Hollywood, not that garbage, but real heroes, and I find that up. And the proverb says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. And that train up a child is their bent. They're bent. What all I ever wanted to be was a truck driver when I was growing up. And I was a truck driver, but I have, I don't know, 2 or 3 degrees. I have a master's degree in something. I can't even remember what it is. Oh yeah, Christian thought. But at any rate, so that's again what the father needs to be sensitive to. But you know, when you train your child to be the best that they can be in the category they're in, that's a great thing. I remember in my earlier years, I worked on a concrete crew and doing curb work, and it was brutal work, setting 10-foot forms. All morning long, we'd set 190 feet of 10-foot forms, digging, and I was exhausted by the time the concrete would arrive. And we had a wide variety of drivers, and to have a truck drive along that and have the chute down. Now we have front-end trucks, and it's much easier. But in those days, it was all rear-end discharge. And some of these guys, they just didn't get it. Man, there was concrete everywhere. But there was one driver, and he was a Christian man, and I was a new convert, and his truck number was 100. And when we were exhausted already at 12 o'clock noon, I said, man, we got to pour all this, we got to finish it, we got to strip it and rub it. But when we would see 100 coming around the corner, oh man, we'd throw our arms up, because this guy was so good, you could eat what he spilled. When he drove his truck down along that curb line, and he put it in there so nice, and we'd be puddling and finish it. And again, he had a great impact in my life. And he was a Christian man, very humble man, but he was the best at what he did, even though he was a concrete truck driver. So what's the final lesson that I think that I pass on to I think we just modeled to our kids just a dependency on the Lord. It ain't happening without him. And that's the way they were reared, and amen. I think I went over, didn't I, Andy? Yes, it's bad for Baptists to do that.
So, I have a question or two, but definitely open to feedback. My just first thought is having children. I mean, having a wife changed me immensely, and I had no clue as to how much I would enjoy being a father. But I delayed having kids for 5 years because I was selfish and scared. And my wife wanted to have kids earlier than that. And so, you know, kind of thinking about this and just seeing this and being involved with the abolition of abortion and other things, and we say children are a blessing, and really starting to believe that, kind of pressing into the murky depths of the Reformed world, and starting to take my own medicine. And, you know, last year, you know, my wife and I decided, well, maybe we should try to have more. And God has given us a daughter on the way. So to that end, you have boys and girls, right?
What's that?
You have boys and girls?
3 and 3.
Great. So what are the differences between raising boys and raising girls? What's your sage advice on the different ways or is there no difference? Help me out.
I really had to get used to my girls having a more of an independent spirit in a good way. The boys just kind of followed right in line. And that's just with the paradigm that I was in. But because the girls came after, there was 3 boys first and then 3 girls after. And I had to learn, again, to say, okay, you can think for yourself. And they were all homeschooled and very successful. None of them were weirdos. They all integrated into the workplace like that. So that fallacy of they won't adapt socially is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. But again, that's the only difference I found, that, and particularly one daughter who's a very independent thinker, and my wife would firstly admit, not in a bad way, but she said she's like you. So I had to learn to respect that. So.
Anyone else? You don't have to name any names here, but did any of your kids have any, I mean, they sound like they all came out pretty well, but did you ever have any of your kids go through a kind of a period of wandering, maybe away from the faith?
They did.
And how did you handle that?
My oldest, he didn't, I wouldn't say he walked away from the faith, he didn't, but he took a little bit of a diversion that very quickly he said, no, that wasn't a good diversion.
And so, I mean, that's praise God for that. How did you handle that as a father? Or did that affect you greatly, or how did you manage that? Or is there anyone else in here who, there's not too many of the older guys who may have raised kids very far along here yet, but just the idea of when we have somebody who looks like they're going a little prodigal, potentially. I mean, that prodigal is a strong term, but we know plenty of people who have, or who are in the faith who have kids have wandered away, and that's a hard situation.
Yeah, none of my kids wandered away, but what I did learn from that was how essential it is to be involved in their decisions in life. Because as their priest, which I am, now that 4 of them are married now and they have their own husbands, but as their priest, in a good way, not in the Roman Catholic sense, you know what I'm saying, I felt no, you know what, I don't think this is good. This is what I see you should be doing. Not in a controlling way, but in their bent, particularly spiritually and in the ministry. But when my oldest went that direction just for a little bit, I wasn't too happy. But he's a great guy. He swung right back, and he's a godly man to now, so.
Again, I would just encourage you, younger guys, to, I mean, some of you come from a fairly large family. I did not. And I don't have that many cousins even, and I only have one brother. And I was raised essentially as an only child for a while because there's a big gap between me and my younger brother. So I think when you come from a large family with a lot of siblings, you think differently about having a lot of kids. But I think that there's been a long shift there of, and we're not at replacement levels of population growth because people are either delaying having kids indefinitely or just frankly they've killed them one way or the other. And so just to say that as marriage is normative, having children is such a blessing. And I want you to desire that, and that is your legacy moving forward. I mean, what you're doing when you have a child is God has allowed you through the miracle of birth or of conception that you have an immortal soul that you and your wife have made, and you have no idea the legacy, the centuries from now, thousands of years from now, perhaps that the children that you have could have on the world and impact the kingdom of God. That's a terrifying thought in many ways. So all the more reason that's a high calling to be a father. And you will screw up and you will sin against them, and just be a Christian at that point. Repent and pray for God's mercy and help. Any other thoughts? Oh yeah, Steve. This will be the last one, and we'll take a break.
Did I catch your name? Keith in the beginning? Keith?
Yes.
Keith. I'm Steve. God's word says that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And as an elder, what's What's your thoughts on that? How have you prepared for that? What do you hope to leave to your children's children?
That's a painful question because, for this reason, because I was in the ministry, I pastored in the area locally, and I always worked in lower-paying jobs. I never was able to accumulate an excessive inheritance physically. Okay, we own our house now, and I hope that if things transpire the way they will, that we'll be able to divide that out. So I can honestly say that I don't have a great physical inheritance to pass on. More hopefully a spiritual inheritance, and that could change. You never know. But that's probably not a bad idea for those who are entrepreneurs to be building that. I just was not in a situation to do that myself financially because of my focus of life, but.